All right, ready to dive deep into this. The beginning of human sin. The Adam and Eve story, We've got lesson plans, biblical commentary, even stuff written for kids, all about this idea of sin entering the world.
Yeah.
I figure you've probably heard this story before, right? But we're going deeper today.
Okay.
Unpacking how different cultures even understand sin. Then we'll get into the biblical text itself.
Sounds good.
See if there are some interpretations, maybe you haven't thought about before.
It's interesting, even the sources for kids, they're dealing with such a big concept.
I know, right? Like, what does sin mean to people today? One source starts off with that question, and the answers are all over the place.
Oh, yeah, it's like a whole range.
Yeah.
Sin is making a mistake, or sin is this outdated idea.
Totally.
Some even say, well, sin can be something fun.
Exactly. It shows how loaded the word sin is, even outside of like a purely religious context.
Yeah.
There's this children's lesson.
Yeah.
Uses the analogy of a sin chair. You do something wrong, you're stuck to it until you pray your way out. A sticky situation.
Literally? Yeah. A little simplistic, maybe.
Right.
But it gets the point across. Sin can feel like a trap. And lots of people see asking God for help as the way out.
For sure. It definitely makes you think. Okay, moving into the biblical story itself.
Right.
The sources, they really emphasize how crafty Satan was, using the serpent to tempt Eve. He doesn't outright lie about what God said about the fruit.
Right.
But what he does is way more subtle.
Oh, yeah, he misrepresents God's words. Like when he asks Eve, did God really say you can't eat from any tree?
Right.
He twists things, to make God seem like he's holding out on purpose.
Yeah, like God's just trying to, stop the fun.
Right. Exactly. It's like he's trying to plant this little seed of doubt. Maybe God isn't as good as he seems. And then there's how he downplays the consequences. Tells Eve, you won't surely die.
Oh, wow.
Contradicting God, but making it sound like maybe the punishment isn't for sure.
So he's not just, twisting what God's like. He's also making the consequences seem uncertain.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to see why they call him cunning. What's interesting is how he uses Eve's desire for knowledge to make disobedience seem, powerful.
Absolutely. It's not like he forces her. He makes it seem like it's her choice, like her path to becoming, well, like God, he says.
Wow.
It's textbook manipulation.
Okay, that makes the whole serpent thing even creepier.
Yeah.
Speaking of appealing, the sources, they break this temptation down into three parts. First, it appeals to, the desires of the flesh. The food was good to eat, that basic instinct for pleasure.
And then there's how it looks, appealing to the desires of the eyes. The sources say it was pleasant to look at.
It's true. How things look can be super persuasive.
Even today, yeah.
And finally, this temptation that targets pride, the promise of wisdom. Eating the fruit will make her like God. Appealing to, wanting knowledge and status.
It's hitting on all these different levels of desire. And, the sources even connect this back to 1 John 2.16. It describes the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life as being of the world, not of the Father.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like these temptations aren't just in this one old story. We deal with this stuff even now.
Right.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
How often are we tempted by something just because it looks good?
Yeah.
Or feels good?
Yeah.
Or makes us feel important?
All the time. Makes you wonder how much of our choices are really free, How much are we driven by these desires we have deep down?
Right. Makes you think. And, speaking of choices, the sources make this point about Eve and Adam. They're different. Eve, she was tricked by the serpent, believed his lies. But Adam, he knew better.
The sources actually say Adam knowingly disobeyed God. And that makes his sin maybe even worse. It makes you wonder, though, was he just following his wife? Or was it something deeper, like a deliberate act of rebelling?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the text doesn't come right out and say, so we're left to, think about the nature of his own choice.
Exactly. Looking beyond the surface, to grapple with, well, what motivates people and how we make choices.
Right. And this whole act of disobeying, that's what theologians call the fall of man.
Right.
Which leads to this idea of original sin.
And it's depicted as this huge revolution against God's rule on earth.
Yeah.
The sources say that from then on, sin spread like a virus. Through all of humanity. It's like, if you connect it to the bigger picture, the fall isn't just about fruit. It's about this struggle between good and evil, obedience and rebellion. It shapes human history.
Wow, it's like that one act just messed up the whole world. But what happened to Adam and Eve right then? What changed immediately?
Well, the sources talk about this sudden feeling of shame
Yeah.
and fear. They realize they're naked and they try to hide from God.
Oh, right.
It's like a sign that their relationship with him is broken.
Like they lost their innocence or something.
Yeah, exactly. This feeling of being exposed and alone. And then there's the punishment God talked about. In the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die.
So they died right there.
Not like right away, no. But the sources, they talk about spiritual death being separated from God. That happened instantly. And, well, physical death became, inevitable from that moment on.
That's intense. It's interesting how the serpent gets cursed, too. Doomed to, crawl on its belly.
Right, it could be symbolic, of how degrading and humiliating it is to choose evil. This creature that was so cunning is reduced to this, lowly state.
It seems like the whole story is full of symbolism. Even the specific punishments for Adam and Eve, pain in childbirth for the woman, and, all that hard work for the man, toiling the ground.
Yeah, it's not just about death then, it's about hardship, suffering. That's all part of being human now.
Right. But one source points out that some people today, especially those who don't take the Bible literally, they disagree with this whole idea of, original sin and sin nature.
Yeah, it's a good point. Not everyone agrees we inherit the consequences of what Adam and Eve did. There are other ways to interpret it. Some people emphasize individual responsibility instead.
So it becomes this question of, how much of our tendency to mess up is because of what happened back then, and how much is our own fault?
It's a debate people have had for ages, and, well, there's no easy answer. But it's those nuances that make things really interesting. One source actually breaks down the different Hebrew words for sin in the Bible.
Okay, I'm listening. What kind of nuances are we talking about?
Well, there's this word translated as transgression. It means you're deliberately breaking God's law. A willful act of rebellion, It's interesting because it's also used to describe, political rebellion, which adds a whole other layer of meaning to the Adam and Eve story.
So it's not just making a mistake, it's actively going against authority.
Yeah. And then there's the word hatat, the most common word for sin. Literally means to miss the mark, which emphasizes that we're not living up to God's standards.
So it's not just blatant rebellion, it's those everyday times we fail, too, to live up to our potential.
Right. In the Old Testament, it gives different reasons why people sin. Fear of others, wrong motives, anger, being influenced by others, even prosperity leading to, independence from God.
Wow. It's sin has all these different sides to it, with roots inside and outside of us.
Exactly. And, well, the sources emphasize how widespread sin is, but they also talk about ways to, overcome temptation, fearing God, meditating on his word, remembering what happened in the past, all ways to resist those urges.
So we're not totally powerless then. We can choose what's right, and there are things we can do to stay on track.
Yeah, it's a message of being accountable, but also having hope. And I think that's where some of those different interpretations come in. Remember how we mentioned that not all Jewish interpreters believe in the fall of man the same way, as this event that made all humans sinful?
Oh, right, yeah. So there's room for a more, complex view, one that sees our potential for goodness along with, our capacity for doing wrong.
Exactly. It's not just black and white. And acknowledging those different perspectives, well, it can lead to better conversations about sin, responsibility, and in the end, redemption.
It's all about exploring those, complicated parts. And this deep dive, it's definitely giving us lots to think about.
For sure. We're just scratching the surface, really. There's still so much to uncover.
Okay, before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's get back to Satan's role in all of this. The sources, they make him out to be pretty scary. Cunning, deceptive, using all this twisted logic and half-truths to mislead Eve.
He's like the ultimate enemy, trying to undermine God and cause chaos in his creation.
Yeah, and one source even says maybe Satan's motivated by jealousy. He sees Adam and Eve with God's favor while he's been kicked out of heaven.
That's an interesting idea. Makes him a more complex character, right? His actions come from this hurt pride, maybe even a desire for revenge.
He's trying to ruin God's relationship with humanity because his own relationship with God is broken.
Fascinating, isn't it? This whole psychological dynamic. And it reminds us that even with evil, there are often deeper reasons, hurts behind it. Doesn't make it okay, of course, but it adds another layer of understanding.
Speaking of understanding, there's one detail that really stuck out to me. When Eve is telling the serpent about God's command, she adds something God never said.
Oh, right. She says God told them not to touch the fruit.
Yeah, God said, "You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." But God never said anything about not touching it.
Right. It's a small detail, but it's important. It makes you wonder about, like, how humans interpret things.
It's like we add our own spin to stuff,
And
even with God's commands.
it shows how important it is to go back to the source, really study the Bible for ourselves, not just rely on what other people say. We have to be rooted in the truth, able to tell the difference between what God really said and what we made up.
Absolutely. Building that personal relationship with God, asking him for guidance directly, that's key. But okay, let's switch gears for a second. Talk about the specific punishments God gives to Adam and Eve. There's a lot of symbolism in those, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. Each punishment, it's like it reflects what they did wrong and foreshadows like the consequences sin has in the world even now. Take the woman's punishment, pain in childbirth. One source says this symbolizes all the hardship and sorrow that now come with new life.
So even something beautiful, like having a baby, now has pain because of sin.
That's the idea. And then there's the man's punishment. All that toil and struggle to work the land. One source interprets it as like a symbol of how frustrating and pointless human work will become.
It's interesting because before the fall, Adam was supposed to take care of the garden, right? Now work is a burden. All this sweat and tiredness.
It's like sin messed up the harmony between people and nature. The ground, it used to be fruitful and giving. Now it resists our efforts. We have to work so hard for even the smallest reward.
It's like this constant reminder that we're not in sync with how God designed things anymore.
And then there's the serpent, cursed to crawl on its belly. It often represents the degradation and humiliation that comes after sin.
It's a powerful image. Sin doesn't just separate us from God. It makes us less dignified, too. Like we're not living up to our potential.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Reminds us how much we lose when we choose to disobey God.
For sure. And thinking about Adam and Eve specifically, the sources really emphasize that Adam's sin was probably worse than Eve's because he knew what he was doing.
Right. Eve was deceived, but Adam made a conscious choice.
It's a big difference. It makes you think about responsibility and what it means to deliberately disobey. Makes you wonder, was Adam just going along with his wife? Or was there something more going on inside him, some rebellion? The text doesn't tell us for sure.
No, it doesn't. It challenges us to think about those inner motives and how big the consequences are for our choices, especially when we go against God's will on purpose.
Let's go back to how Satan tricks Eve. It's so subtle. The sources really break down his, manipulative tactics.
Yeah, it's scary how clever and deceptive evil can be.
Like, instead of saying God's command is wrong, he twists it with his question. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree?
It's pretty smart in a twisted way. He takes God's words and makes them sound like God's being unfair and controlling. It makes Eve start to doubt God's goodness.
And it plays on our desire to be free, to know things. Suddenly, God's command seems like he's holding Eve back from something she should have.
Exactly. And then there's how he downplays the consequences. You won't surely die. He's saying the opposite of what God said.
It's like a classic way to manipulate someone. Make the risk seem small, create doubt, and then the forbidden thing seems irresistible.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really sneaky is he's not using force. He's appealing to Eve's intellect, her curiosity. He makes disobedience seem like the smart choice, the one that gives her power.
It reminds us that temptation often looks like something good. Knowledge, freedom, feeling fulfilled.
Which is why we need to be careful. To test everything we hear against what God's word says. Not be fooled by smooth talk and promises that sound too good to be true.
Okay, let's talk about original sin again, that idea that started with this whole event. We talked about how people interpret it differently.
Right. It's a complex theological idea. There's room for different interpretations.
Some believe that we actually inherit the guilt of Adam and Eve's sin, meaning we're condemned from birth because of what they did. Others focus more on inheriting a sinful nature, like a tendency to sin, but not the actual guilt.
It's an important difference, and it leads to different ways of understanding how we're saved from the consequences of sin.
Like, those who believe in inheriting guilt might say we need a radical experience of grace to be born again, to wash away that original stain.
While those who focus on inheriting a sinful nature might emphasize the importance of becoming more holy over time, overcoming sin with God's help.
It's amazing how different theological interpretations shape our understanding of sin, salvation, and even how we live our lives as Christians.
It shows how rich and diverse Christian thought is. And remember, we also talked about how the fall of man isn't universally accepted by Jewish interpreters. They don't always see it as this event that made all of humanity sinful.
Yeah, it's not a simple issue. There are different ways of understanding what the fall means for us.
Exactly. Acknowledging those differences can lead to better conversations about sin, responsibility, and in the end, redemption.
For sure. It's fascinating to explore these different perspectives, to wrestle with these complex ideas. That's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
I agree.
All right, so we've looked at the story of Adam and Eve, explored the concept of sin, and talked about the consequences of the fall. But what does it all mean for us today? How does this ancient story connect to our modern lives?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think these sources give us some valuable insights.
Well, for one thing, the story gives us a way to understand temptation. We see how easily we can be tricked by promises that aren't true, how our desires can lead us down the wrong path, and how even good intentions can turn into disobedience.
It's a warning, reminding us to be careful and to use good judgment, to test everything we hear against what God's word says.
Right. And the consequences of the fall show us how serious sin is.
Right.
It's not just a little mistake or something harmless. Sin has big implications. It affects our relationship with God, our relationships with others, and even the natural world.
It reminds us that our choices matter, and that sin has a ripple effect, impacting more than just ourselves.
But the good news is, the story doesn't end with the fall. God loves us and wants us to come back to him. He makes a way for that to happen.
Right. The story of Adam and Eve is just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that goes through the whole Bible and ends with Jesus dying and coming back to life. That's the ultimate act of redemption.
So the fall shows us how broken humanity is, but it's ultimately a story of hope.
Exactly. It reminds us that even though we're messed up, God can still reach us. He wants to fix things with us, to heal the wounds of sin, and to make us whole.
Remember that sin chair idea from one of the children's sources?
The one where you're stuck until you pray.
Yeah. It's simple, but it captures an important truth. We need God's help to break free from sin. We can't do it ourselves.
It's a good reminder that we're not meant to go through this alone. God's always there, offering forgiveness, grace, and the power to overcome sin.
And the story of Adam and Eve points us to that truth. Even when we really mess up, God's love and mercy are still there for us.
It's a powerful message of hope and redemption.
So we've seen how the story of Adam and Eve helps us understand temptation, sin, and what happens when we disobey. But here's something to think about. The sources mention that some people don't believe in original sin or sin nature.
Right, it's not a belief everyone shares.
So, does believing in those ideas change how we see ourselves and our actions? How might different interpretations of this story change how we understand right and wrong, and who's responsible for what? That's something to think about as you continue your own deep dive. Really makes you wonder, if we believe we're, messed up from the start, burdened by this original sin thing, does it make us give in to temptation more? Or does it make us try harder to, be redeemed?
It's interesting, right? There's no easy answer. For some people, admitting they're inherently flawed is actually kind of freeing.
Oh, yeah.
It's like saying, okay, I'm not perfect, I mess up, but at least I'm not the only one struggling with this.
Yeah, I can see how that can make you humble, more reliant on God's grace.
Exactly. You're not relying on yourself, but on something bigger. But for others, this idea of original sin, it just feels heavy, like a destiny they can't escape.
Yeah, what's the point of trying if I'm already doomed?
Right, and that's a legitimate concern. It shows how we have to be careful with these theological ideas, not oversimplify them or force one interpretation on everyone.
It's about thinking about these things, looking at different viewpoints, and finding what fits with our own understanding of God and ourselves. Not just blindly accepting, but really engaging with the ideas.
Exactly. We're all on this faith journey, and how we understand sin and redemption changes over time. Remember that activity we mentioned where students were supposed to interview people about what sin meant to them?
Oh, yeah.
Different walks of life.
And they got answers all across the board, making a mistake to just a religious word I don't get, to even nothing, because there's no right or wrong.
It just shows how subjective morality can be. What's a clear sin to one person is totally different for someone else.
It shows we need to be humble, respectful in these conversations.
Yeah.
We might not always agree, but we can still learn from each other, broaden our perspectives.
Speaking of different perspectives, one source had this quote, kind of chilling, from Revelation. It says, "The dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan." It directly links the serpent in the garden to Satan, like solidifying him as the ultimate tempter.
Whoa. It's a reminder that this fight against temptation, it's not just some idea, it's real. We all face it every day.
Absolutely. And while the Adam and Eve story warns us about falling for temptation, it also points to redemption.
Right. Even when we mess up, make choices we regret, God's love and mercy are still there. It's a good message to end on, isn't it?
Definitely.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into the beginning of human sin, I think what we learned is this. The Adam and Eve story, as old as it is, still has so much to say to us today. It gives us deep insights into temptation, the impact of our choices, and ultimately, the hope of redemption. It makes us think critically about what we believe and encourages us to lean on God's grace as we go through life.
Well said. It's a story that keeps making us think, reflect on who we are and our relationship with God.
And remember, this isn't the end. Keep exploring, questioning, and diving deeper into, all this knowledge and understanding. Until next time.